Okay, so last time we discussed class the research designs. I hope by now you have identified the specific research design that you are going to utilize in your own study. And I hope you have started making a draft of your methodology section. So you only have the research design and also the research local. The next will be the respondents of the study if ever you have the respondents. I mean human respondents. If not, you are making an experimental study. Sige, record ko lang, Subern. And then, yung mga studies na hindi naman experimental talaga, pero walang human subject, then you don't have the respondents of the study in your methodology section. You will already or directly write the sampling technique na. But for those na may mga respondents, like those na magkakandak ng survey, quantitative, descriptive na research, you will first identify who will be the respondents of your study. Will that be medical technology students in the school? Or will that be residents of General Santos City or whoever? Kung sino man yung respondents ninyo. So again, the first thing that you need to mention are the respondents of your study, and you have to also include the description of your respondents or simply the criteria, the inclusion criteria. If, for example, medtech students, yung inyong respondents, who will that be? Will that include all the medtech students, or you are just going to include the first year students or whoever? So again, you have to provide a description of the circumstances under which the respondents are selected. And then we have here sa respondents, this is still actually under the respondents of the study, the population and the sample. Kasi di ba the first thing that you need to do is to select the population. So the population will be the universe of your study, and that will also be called the parameters of the study because dyan yung kukunin yung inyong i-measure. So lahat ng mga elements under study, dyan kukunin lahat sa population. So examples of population will be all the first year pharmacy students, or in your case, all the first year medical technology students, or the RadTech faculty, the MedTech faculty, all the senior citizens in Gensan, or mga residents lang talaga sa General Santos City, mga millennials or whoever, kung sino yung target nyo na population. So example here of how we write the respondents of the study. We have the respondents of the study were members of the Senior Citizen Association of Cabanatuan City. But take note that this one is expressed in past tense kasi this one is already a completed study. Ang sa inyo, do not forget, since you are yet to conduct the study, then dapat naka-future tense lahat ng verb nyo from the introduction, like sa scope and delimitation, and the methodology also, naka-future tense yan. Now we have here the description of the circumstance na sinelect ninyo, yung ginawa ninyo in selecting your or the respondent of this study, not your study. The respondents who account for 60% of the SSS retirees only were selected through purposive sampling. So itong purposive sampling is a sampling technique. I will be discussing this later. And then only the respondents who could read and write, that will be the inclusion criteria, and who could still attend meetings of the association were counted as sample. So hence out of 150 samples, 90 were made respondents. So again, not everyone in the population will be included in your study. We will just get samples. However, you first need to identify the population. Paano pag walang population? Diretso na tayo. I will show you later an example of how are we going to do that kung walang population. Sige. tapusin ko itong kinds of population first kasi that's the number one step. You have to identify the population of your study. So pag sinabing finite population, these are the population that can be counted. For example, the residents of General Santos City. This can actually be counted. We have the census and the Philippine Statistics Authority have the data for this. Or if you like to have the medical technology students of GSD-MSFI, you can get the data from the registrar. So those are the population that can be counted. However, we also have infinite population. And ito yung kabaliktaran. We cannot count this. So examples, we have here stars in the sky, or the number of pedestrians that will cross the street, that will be impossible to count, no? Alam mo, atang ta dito tibok adlaw just to count the number of the people na magko-cross ng street na yon. And at the same time, we have to consider also na hindi naman pareho yung number of people na nagko-cross on a certain street. So most of the time, we will have the finite population. However, in conducting research, we don't really do population testing. We don't give our questionnaire to all the members of the population. We don't do investigation to everyone. Instead, we do sampling. So when you say sample, that is a group or a limited number of people taken from our population, and they will be the representative. Okay? They will be representative of the population. So sila naman, meron naman silang characteristic na sinet natin. So pwede natin silang gamitin in our testing. So these are the reasons why we don't do population testing. Number one, it will be expensive for us. It will cost us a lot of money if we want to include all members of the population. If your study there states na you will conduct the study sa residents of General Santos City, it will be very expensive for you to look for all the residents of Gensan, and then you will be handing out questionnaires to them and let them answer your survey. And aside from that, it will also take a lot of time. Remember that we are time bounded here sa research. You will just be given January to March to collect your data. And if you want to do population testing, most likely hindi natin yan ma-accomplish given we have a limited time. And then aside from that, sampling is a sample taken from the population is actually enough to make inferences or generalizations or even conclusions. Like for example, your study is about level of knowledge of the residents on vaccines. So if we take just samples from the population, what we get, what answers the makukuha natin from the sample will be used in making generalization. So kung nakita natin mataas pala yung level ng knowledge ng ating samples, we can actually use that data to conclude na the residents of General Santos City is mataas din yung level of knowledge. So again, the sampling is accepted. The samples are enough to make generalizations for our population. So we have here steps in sampling. Number one, identification of the population, and then determination of the required sample size, and selection of the sample. So later ko na ipakita yung example kung paano ito sinusulat, ha? Both sa descriptive na study and sa experimental na study. So dito muna tayo sa pagko-compute ng sampling size. Sa pag-compute ng sampling size, we can use this formula. We call this class the Sloven's formula. Again, we call this the Sloven's formula. This is N is equal to capital letter N divided by 1 plus capital letter N times E. And by the way, let me correct this. This is E squared. Okay, E squared yan siya. So small letter n here is the sample size. Iko-compute natin yan siya. The population size, kayo mismo yung kukuha niyan. You can get that from the PSA, or if not, then you can explore sa example sa internet. Baka merong mga websites na meron silang data for the population, for the number of individual sa population ninyo. Pwede nyo din yung gawin. And then letter E there is the margin of error. Okay, wait. Yan, letter E there is the margin of error. So actually, since we are just doing sampling, we will be giving a room for error. So kung population kasi, 100% talaga yon. But since we are just getting a representative, hindi lahat yung itetest natin, syempre automatic yan siya na meron tayong room na i-allow for non-precision. So yan yung error na yan. And our minimum is 5%. So that is computed as 0.05. Okay? Okay, I will also discuss that later, Jamela, para alam nyo kung ano ang gagawin nyo sa research ninyo. Okay? Later ha, sa sampling technique. Pero dito muna tayo sa Slovin's formula. Example, the population for your research are the medical technology students. And example lang ito ha. For example, we have 540 students all in all. This is for the population, medtech students ha. Now, since we will just do sampling, so we will be computing for the sample size. So we will have N is equal to capital letter N is 540 divided by 1 plus N here is still the sample size. So this is still 540 here. And then E, remember, is the room for error. And we are just allowing 5%. So that is 0.05. And then is-square natin siya. And then this is 540 divided by 1 plus 540 times 0.05 squared is 0.00, wait, 25. Okay? And then let us continue. Dito na lang siya sa kabila. So 0.0025 times 540 is 1.35. Okay, so this is 540 divided by 2.35. And thus our N here, 540 divided by 2.35 is 229.70, 79. Pero ganito, when you are computing for the sample size class, especially if we are talking about a person, hindi ka pwedeng mag-survey sa 0.79 na tao. So in sampling, in computing the sample size, it will always be rounded off to the nearest whole number. So N here is 230. Okay? Again, the sample size here is 230. So if you're going to conduct your study na for the 540 na student, supposedly, population yun siya, 230 lang talaga yung kailangan mo. So yun lang yung bibigyan mo ng questionnaire, mag-hand ka sa kanila ng questionnaire and let them answer the questionnaire. So sa kanila ka lang magko-collect. So we don't really do population sample or population testing. We only have the sample testing. So again, we call this Slovin's formula. Now we have another here na pwede natin gamitin in computing the sample size. So you have the option how whether to do it manually using the Slovin's formula or you may use the software. So we call this the Rausoft calculator. Hanapin nyo lang siya sa Google. You can see their sample size calculator by Rausoft. This is also accepted sa pag-compute. You will still see there that we have the margin of error and it's actually always 5%. Therefore, 95% of that will be our confidence level. We are confident na 95% of our data to be collected will be valid and correct. And then dito mo ilalagay what is the population size. You will write here the population size na nakuha mo, either through researching or kayo mismo talaga ang pupunta to whatever agency na merong data nitong population. So ilalagay mo lang dyan, example yung example ko kanina, 540 medtech students. Itong 50%, hayaan nyo na to, hindi talaga ito siya binabago. That is just the response distribution. But as you write 540, magre-recommend siya dito sa baba ng sample size. I hope you can see it. Nasa baba, this one. So this will be our recommended sample size if we use the Rausoft. Okay? So the Rausoft and the Sloven's formula are actually almost the same. May slight difference lang in the number. But diba sa Sloven's kanina, it's 230. For Rausoft, it's 225. Accepted sila both. It's just that sa inyong paper, you have to identify kung ano ang ginamit nyo in computing the sample size. So isulat nyo talaga doon whether you use the Sloven's formula or the Rausoft. Okay, that is for the computation of the sample size. Okay, wait lang. So ito yun siya, class. Meron akong example here. This one is a medtech study dati. This is actually the medical fake news. So 'di ba methodology section tayo, nasira lang yung format dito. So as much as possible, mag-send kayo sa akin ng PDF para hindi siya masira. So after the research design, we have the research local. And after the research local, if you have respondents sa study mo, you have to really identify the respondents of the study. So just like in this one, their respondents were the millennials born in 1981 to 1996. That is the description according to their reference, and currently residing in General Santos City. And then, i-correct ko lang ito kasi this one is not being corrected yet. For hardbound ito, pero kailangan ko pa kasi itong i-check. So, instead of sampling procedure, we actually call this sampling technique. Okay? So, sa sampling technique, this is where we identify how we do the sampling. So, whether we use the, number one is how, balikan mo yung inclusion and exclusion criteria mo for your respondents. And then afterwards, you have to identify your sample size. And then you have to identify how did you compute your sample size, whether you use the Sloven's or a software. And then afterwards, you have to also identify the sampling technique that you are going to use. So later, i-discuss natin itong sampling technique. Ang sampling techniques, class, these are the process that we do in selecting. So parehas ato, 540 supposedly, pero ang pag-compute sa sampling size, 230 lang kung Sloven's formula. In selecting the 230, ito yung process na gagawin natin, the sampling technique. So later na. We have a separate discussion for that. But as you can see, sa sampling technique kasi nila, they have identified that their sampling technique is quota and purposive. So they will not really use the Sloven's formula or any software here kasi quota. Meaning sila yung magsiset ng ilan yung gusto nilang respondents regardless of the population. So sila ang nag-set kaya quota. Wala kayong makikita na computation of the sampling size. So ang sinet nila here will be the 520. Sila nag-set niyan. Sila din nag-set na kukuha lang sila ng 20 millennials in each 26 domicile sa General Santos City, 26 barangays. So yun yung ginawa nila in their research. Actually, that will be the researcher's choice kung ano ang gagawin mo sa pagkuha mo ng iyong sample. Pero later, I'll be reminding you na hindi ka din basta-basta nga, gusto ko 10 lang para dali maman. Dili po na siya pwede. We have to consider a lot of things. Okay? Later na. Discuss ko. So, paano nila defend, ma'am? Actually, wala naman masyadong maraming question with the 520 kasi they have stated here already nga quota nga yung gusto nilang gawin. Kung ma-reach na nila ang 520, then that's it. Stop na sila. So wala masyadong question for that. Okay? Pero pag moingon na sila og ma'am 10 lang jud ka buok, ma'am kana mo palag jud ang mga panel ano 10 lang man sa kadaghan moabot og pila ka libo ang respondents ay ang population ninyo tas 10 lang kana mag-react yun da sila. Pero this time kasi millennials in general Santos City no kani man good is considered acceptable already. So quota ilahang gusto and purposive. Pag purposive kasi it's the judgment of the researcher kung ito isalin niya ba ito or hindi na respondent or pili pa siya ng iba. So this one again is how we do the respondents of the study and the sampling procedure. Now pili tayo yung mga magkakandak ng experiment. Let me check first. Let me open kung paano nila ginawa. Kasi nga wala tayong respondent of the study here. Napin ko lang ha. Wait lang. Ano po dapit? Padaghan sa sulod sa ako ang this one. This one is an experimental na study. Meron ba experimental sa inyo? Okay. So this one is their methodology. Again, naka-document MS Word kasi ito nasira yung kanilang format. The research design, research local, and after the research local, they actually made a research methodology, just a flow chart of what are they going to do in conducting the experiment. And then take note, wala silang respondents of the study. Right after the research local, it will be directly the sampling technique. Now, the sampling technique will be based on the experiment also. In this case kasi, since they used animal like the Swiss albino mice, meron pa rin yung sampling technique sa pagpili and sa pag-assign in each groups. Remember, pag you are doing an experimental study, you have the control group and the experimental group. Yung sa kanila tatlo kasi yung control nila dalawa, positive and negative. So kung babasahin natin yung sampling technique nila, in this study, Swiss albino mice were used for both the pre-experimental and true experiment phases. The sampling technique used in this study was simple random study under the probability sampling. So diretso na talaga sila in the sampling technique. So random, meron na silang mice, ang ginawa nila randomly, they assigned the mice to each of the treatment groups. So wala ka nang maraming sasabihin, unlike sa respondents of the study na you really have to identify and describe your respondent. Barangay. Okay, contact tracing sa amo ang balay. My brother was siya kanang sa tawag na workmate na nag-positive sa COVID. Damay-damay na this, pero padayon na tong klase. Paano sa inyo? Water from automated vending machine and water from water bottles. That will still be random. So, sa mga water vending machine, you have... Wait lang. You will still identify the how many... Kung may makuha kayo na data ha, you will still identify also how many vending machines do we have here in Jensen. And you can also compute for the sample size. Or kung dili mo gusto nga daghan jud kay no kay basig daghan pud kaayo ri siya, ubot og 100 tigbasta ni sa ato ang gasto. You can also set pwede mo kamo mismo ang mag-set na gusto ninyo 5 lang ang 5 lang or 2 lang ka vending machine ang inyuhang i-test. That is also accepted. Pero ang conclusion manggod ninyo will not be for the whole general Santos City. Your conclusion will just be limited to the vending machine nga gisample ninyo. Pero pwede ra na siya, accepted na siya kay basig daghan na kaayo or wala mo'y makuha na data kung pila gyud ka vending machine ang naa diri sa Gensan. Na siguro mo'y makuha nga data sa mga naay business permit, pero how about tong mga walay business permit, hindi siya ma-approve. May piliin kayo na location sa barangay na mataas ang diarrhea cases. Oh, okay. And then in that barangay, you may identify also how many vending machines ang available. And from there, you may select. You may select also. You can do the Slovenes formula. Pero kung sa tanaw ninyo, dili ninyo kaya kay daghan ra gyud siya kaayo, then you can set. Example, 5 lang. 5 ka vending machine lang ang inyong i-test. Pero you don't need to to write the name of the establishment in your paper. Kaya wala man tanan ng hid sa ilahang i-test na to ilang vending machine. So mag-coding lang mo ana ABC, vending machine A, B, C, and D. Pwede kayo mag-quota. Yeah. Yes, Risha. Kay para pasigdagan ka na 500 ka buok and then ang testing ana is mahal. Patigbas ta ni sa ato ang cost. Working adults of Jansan pwede mag-quota, usually 18 to 59 years old na siya nga age range. You can also do that, gusto mo mag-quota? Di mo gusto mag-compute sa inyong sample size? That is accepted. Just right there na mag-quota sampling kayo. And you have to find a number that you think reasonable to be a representative of your population, which is the adults, working adults sa General Santos City. Ang respondents is medtech sa tertiary hospitals as a whole po and paghanap. Okay. You have to, what are you going to do? Are we allowed to go to the hospital? If you are already allowed to go to the hospital, you have to go to these hospitals and ask them pila ka buok ilahang medtech employed so far. And then from there, kung sa ganyan inyong study, nakalimot ko sa inyong study. Mag-write mo og letter for that. Tapos from there, pag alam nyo na yung number of medtech, doon na kayo, yun na yung magiging population nyo. Kung sa 5 hospitals, mga pila sila kabuok, 100 sila kabuok, then you have to compute your sample size from there. Okay? So that's how you get your population size sa inyong grupo. So murag trabahoon gyud na ninyo siya para kabalo mo kung pila jud. Actually, pwede ra pud mo, kung gusto mo formal, you can write a letter sa ilaha asking them sa ilang population. Pero most of the time, ang ginagawa na lang kasi is if ever meron kayong kakilala dyan and meron naman siyang direct knowledge on the number of employed medical technologies, pwede na siya diretso. Yung letter nyo na lang is asking permission to the hospital na you will be conducting studies sa kanilang mga employees. So, para dugay-dugay, kaya na sila mutubag as in. So, mo na nga, shortcut. Dito na lang mo mag-letter sa ilaha sa permission. Mag-send kayo na, ma'am, for example. Later, pag mag-sampling technique na tayo, you will also know and identify kung unsay buhaton ninyo din kung mag-isa-isa ba mo for each hospital or i-total ninyo sila. Depende kasi siya sa study. Okay, sige, go rin siya. Sa population size na variable. Sa research, let's say 4 barangays na need pa ba malaman ang entire population. Okay, what is your study again, Jamela? You will also do that. You have to identify the population for each barangay also. So kung tag 10,000 sila kada isa, so that's a total of 40,000. And from there, you may compute your sample size. But if you want, depende mo na siya nga ang akong tubag permi is depende sa study kasi it's up to you. If you want na per barangay talaga na may mga representative talaga, ang gagawin ninyo, hindi niyo siya ito-total. You will still get the population for each barangay and for each barangay magko-compute kayo ng sample size. So you have to talk among your group mates and depende sa objective ng inyong study. Kung kailangan ba talaga well-represented ang each barangay, so you do the individual na sampling, or kung okay lang na hindi talaga well represented ang barangay, so i-total ninyo lahat and compute for the sample size. I hope na nasabtan to. Level of awareness. Okay. Sige. Okay. Anything else before ta mag-move on? Wala na. So in here, we will be talking now about the sampling techniques. After identifying the population of our study, sampling technique na siya after. Now take note of this, in sampling, we can use the rule of the thumb, which is we will just get 20% from the population frame. So kung naatay 100 kabuok nga population, 20 of that will be our sample. That is acceptable. Take note that is acceptable na 20% lang. Pero take note of this. Your research will have no statement for validity. Acceptable siya for research, pero we cannot really conclude that our result or results are valid. Okay? So kung gusto ninyo valid ang inyong result, then we can have more than the 20%. Okay? Now, for descriptive, normative, and survey research, those who will be doing survey, may mga questionnaire. Take note of this. The greater the sample, the nearer the result approaches the parametric values. So, what do we really want here? If you want to conduct quota sampling, we have to make sure na we have more samples. Most of the time, it will be 50% and above. Pwede natin yan siyang i-consider so that our results can also be called valid. Okay? And parametric yung values natin, we can do parametric testing or parametric na statistical testing. Now, if for example, ang napili ninyo na sample size or yung sample size lang talaga na nakuha ninyo, na bisag nag-set mo, pag-compute ninyo 240 pero bisag unsaon ninyo wala na yung mutubag, so wala gyud ninyo naabot ang recommended na sample size. Take note of this. Less than 50% but more than 30%, parametric statistics na analysis can be considered, but your interpretation will only be limited for the sample. You cannot conclude for the whole population. Pag pag less than 50%, pero umabot naman siya ng more than 30%. Accepted, we can still do parametric testing for the statistics, but the conclusion, the interpretation will just be for the sample alone. We cannot do generalization for the whole population. Now, paano kung yung nakuha ninyo na data is less than 30% and ang ginamit na sampling procedure or na sampling technique is purposive sampling. So, ganun pa rin, the interpretation will still be limited to the sample only. You cannot do generalization for the whole population, but parametric statistics may not be used here. So, we will be doing a non-parametric test. I don't know your background sa statistics, but actually, diba, before you can pursue the research na subject, you have to pass first your statistics. But for the sake na basig nakalimot na unsa tong mga statistical tools na gidiscuss ninyo sa inyong second year siguro, I will also include sa ako ang discussion i-review about the parametric and the non-parametric testing, but I think gagawin natin yan sa research 2 ninyo kasi data analysis na kasi ito siya mahuhulog. So sa research 2 na siya. Pag ako inyong teacher kasi we don't know the future yet kung kaya pa ba ng aking load or hindi. So we have 2 kinds of sample class. Sa sampling technique ito ha, we have the so-called probability sample wherein you will give an equal chance to all members of the population to be selected in your study. Dapat silang lahat may chance na ma-select sa study mo. Yung 540 na students kanina na example ko, before you will select the 240, you have to give everyone an equal chance to be included in the 240. But, syempre, since equal chance ito, when you say probability sampling, these are actually random samples. Pag random mo siya ginawa, we can consider this the best representative for our population. Random ha, hindi pwede na ikaw lang, kaning mga estudyante nga, classmate na ko mo na lang ni akong i-appeal, oy wala na to, bahala na tong uban, dili na siya random. So wala sila equal chance. So later we will discuss how are we going to do the random sampling. So findings class of this type of research technique, pag gumawa tayo ng probability sampling or random sampling, are considered valid. The findings are considered valid, and we can use that to make inferences and generalizations for our population. Okay? Questions so far for the probability sampling? Wala. Now, how about if we do non-probability sampling or we have the non-probability sample? Ito naman yung we don't really give equal chance to all members of the population to be chosen and to be included in our study. Therefore, if you do this non-probability sample, this might not be considered a representative of our population, and that we cannot use the data to make inferences or generalizations for the characteristic of our whole population. Now, let's discuss them one by one. Let's start first for the with the probability sampling techniques. Meron tayong mga specific probability sampling technique in which the most common is the so-called simple random sampling. This is the best known and the most common, and we follow two principles here. The first one is the principle of equiprobability, that is giving them equal chance to be selected in our study, and also the principle of independence, wherein the condition of one member of the population will not affect the chance of the other members to be chosen or selected in our study also. Now, how are we going to do the simple random sampling? We have two methods that we can use here, the lottery method, or we can also call this the fishbowl method, and the table of random numbers. Aside from the simple random sampling, we have other three, the systematic sampling with random start, the stratified sampling, and the cluster sampling. And to para ma-subtan yun na siya, I will show you I will show you a video. Where was that again? Wait lang. Para ma-subtan na silang upat. Let me open it. Systematic types of sampling. Wait lang,
Start writing your success story with Chad.
Illustrate.
Your semester strong with support customized to your courses, including writing tools with grammar and plagiarism.
sampling. Okay. So anong ginagawa for stratified sampling? Siyempre, you have to first identify the population. And then afterwards, you have to group them into stratum or strata pag marami. So strata, group yan siya class, but the groups should be homogeneous, meaning magkakapareho sila ng characteristics. So for example, male and female. So isang group sa lahat ng female, and then isang group sa lahat ng male. That's a stratum or a strata kasi dalawa. Homogeneous. Magkapareha sila ng characteristics. And from here, we will compute for the sample size. Kailangan din natin ma-identify ilan lahat yung female, ilan lahat ang male to compute for the sample size of each group. And then after computing the sample size, we go back to the random sampling. So magbabalik pa rin tayo nito sa simple random sampling class. Kaya lang, hindi na siya ganun kahirap kasi hindi naman na ganun karami yung sample size or yung population for each stratum. For each stratum dito. Na kumonte na siya. And that pag magra-random sampling tayo, hindi na tayo masyadong mahihirapan with the bulk kasi nga naka-group na sila. Okay? That's the difference now between simple random and the stratified random sampling. May process ka in between which is grouping the members of the population and then computing the sample size for each group. Questions so far for the simple random sampling and the stratified random sampling? Before tayo mag-move on with the cluster sampling and the systematic sampling with our random start. May gusto ba kayo itanong? It's up to you ha, it's your decision. It's up to you whether okay lang sa inyo mag-simple random, kaya nyo lang, or hindi nyo kaya kasi masyadong marami, so you may opt to do a stratified sampling. Na pag hindi pa rin kaya si stratified sampling class, then we can do the cluster sampling. Let me show you the video for the cluster sampling. Wait lang ha.
Southie Gloria, 6 best.
Okay, systematic sampling is the last one for our probability sampling. Everything starts with the population, ha? So, pero this one is more applicable for small number of population only kasi just like the simple random, you will also assign numbers for all the population here, members of the population. Tapos, i-compute mo pa rin yung sample size. After computing for the sample size, you will compute for the sampling interval. So the assigning of the number starts here in the determination of the population. And then sa sampling interval, we use the formula n divided by n. Capital letter N is the population size, small letter n is yung computed sample size. Tapos pag after mo na determine ang sampling interval, you will randomly choose the starting point. Okay? Between 1 to the sampling interval ha. So parehas atong illustration niya 1 to 30, na-compute niya na sample size is 5, the interval is 6. So ang gipili niya na starting point is 1. Randomly ha, ikaw bahala saan ka mag-start. Pwede ka mag-start sa 2, sa 3, sa 4, sa 5, or sa 6. But yung na-example lang kanina, 1 siya nag-start. I-add mo lang yan siya class with the sampling interval. So 1 plus 6 is 7. That will be the next na mapili mo na ma-include sa population mo. 7 plus 6 is 13. 13 plus 6 is 19. 19 plus 6 is 25. So ayan na sila, 5 na sila. All in all, yan yung sampling size mo. So kung sino yung mga persons dyan sa mga na-assign na number and napili na number, yun yung bibigyan mo ng iyong questionnaire, for example, for the survey. That's how we do the systematic sampling with random start. So I will end here And then next meeting, let us continue with the non-probability sampling techniques. Medyo marami pa yan sila. Non-probability ito, but we don't really deal with numbers here. Walang computation pagdating sa non-probability techniques. I mean computation like interval, but you can still compute for the sample size. Pero ito more on your judgment na. And then after that, we will have the research instruments like making of the questionnaires. And if you want to do interview, how are we going to do the interview? And for the experimental study, we will do observational method. And then if ever you will be making your questionnaire, for example, we will have to test the validity and the reliability also. So tatapusin natin yun siya next meeting. This study, I might or might not give a quiz also. And then after that, after this one, my last lesson for the finals will be the ethical consideration for research. Yan yung magiging last part din ng ating paper aside from the statistical analysis. Ano ang maliit na N, ma'am, sa systematic po? Ano N? Small letter N, sample size, or the population size? Kung kaya nyo yung population na 100 is systematic sampling, walang problema dyan. Okay? Maghingi ng letter sample. Okay, EPM na lang ko, Ana Jerilyn. What else? Let's